Hey there, and welcome to the Downtown Church, where our mission is to become the Word made flesh, to be worshipful, obedient, relational disciple makers. Today, we are continuing our series, A Culture of Discipline, and one of our youth ministers, Cade Williams, is diving into a culture of submission. So let's tune in and learn more.
When I was, I'd say 7, 8 years old, I think, I took some Taekwondo and self-defense courses. I actually think that the program I went to is in where Rujitsu is, near like BB Caps. So I did that growing up for a couple years, which was a lot of fun. You know, you get to do a lot of fun things in Taekwondo. You get to put on the garb. It really the white garb really complemented my pale complexion. You get to learn all these techniques and these forms. You get to train in flexibility. You get to, eventually learn like some grapples and holds and ways to defend yourself in real life situations, which for me as like a 7 and 8 year old, like it was a blast. And all this comes together on sparring days, where it's you and another student in the ring getting to test your skills that you've been working on. And I remember very vividly my first time sparring in Taekwondo. It didn't go well. I was overwhelmed. The student I was up against was much more experienced, had been doing it for a lot longer. And me being just a little kid, it was something that was just very overwhelming to me. And that's part of it. Your first time sparring, you're probably not going to do a great job. And so my instructor is right there with me, coaching me the whole time, trying to encourage me, trying to calm me down, trying to instill confidence in me. And the things he kept mentioning were footwork and blocking. He's like, I just want you to get comfortable in just the movement of sparring, not really focus on winning. And I was focusing on winning because I really wanted to win. And footwork, blocking, it didn't really seem to be getting me anywhere. So I thought I'd try something else. Because I had seen The Karate Kid at this point. And it occurred to me, I was like, you know what? I think the crane kick could maybe work. It worked for him, it could work for me. Let's just say that didn't go well. I didn't stick the landing too good and ended up on my back. I'm so glad TikTok didn't exist then. I would be viral and laughingstock. And so in that moment, I didn't trust my instructor. The teacher was telling me, winning's not important. Well, I care about your footwork and I care about blocking. We'll focus on winning later. But I had my other ideas. I had my own way of how things should go. Fast forward a couple of years later, I did swimming classes a lot. I like to swim. Swimming has just been a habit of mine over the years. And I remember kind of doing swimming training lessons. I did some competitive swimming, not a whole lot. But after school in this program, I'm swimming and I'm getting tired. Swimming's very tiring, especially when you're doing a whole hour of laps and stuff. And I'm getting to a point where our instructor sees that we're tired and begins to start cheering us on. She's very passionate in cheering us on, trying to encourage us to push through. I remember kind of coming up to the edge of the lap pool, about to turn and go back for the next stretch, and I pause. I just stop. I just take a breather. And my instructor, she tells me that I can do it. And I told her to her face, no, I can't. Which, in the past, if you're exhausted, this instructor was a good instructor. She let you get out of the pool and rest. That wasn't the problem. It was the way I said it, right? It was the way I said it to her. It was, no, I can't. And she was like, yes, you can, and gave me an extra few laps. And I did them. I could do it. She was right. I could do it. Because she believed in me when I didn't believe in myself to push through that obstacle. But I had my own ideas about where my limits were. And I didn't trust my instructor. Fast forward a few more years later, I played baseball from the time I was 5 till my junior year in high school. I've liked playing the sport. I played for a lot of different teams. Around middle school, I'm playing in the Searcy City League, and I was pretty good. I made all-star team a few years. I had a good time. And I even at one season had a coach solely for me to pitch, because I was left-handed, and that was really useful for pitching. And so this instructor would give me a little bit of extra lessons just to kind of help me see if I wanted to progress as a pitcher. And I was not having a good game on one particular night. And it's really embarrassing when you're pitching and you throw a ball that's just not a good one. It just hits the other kid in the face. Kind of frazzled me. I didn't want to hit the kid in the face, obviously. But things were not going well. There was walk after walk, a base hit, and it was just falling apart in that inning. And so, like a good instructor, my teacher comes out, pauses the inning to talk to me, to calm me down. And he tries to get me to breathe. He believed in breathing exercises because he could tell I was pretty frazzled. And I don't even remember exactly what I said to him. But he told me something along the lines of, "You're doing too much. Just focus on what I told you to do." And I remember saying something along the lines of, "It's not working." My dad heard me say that and had a conversation with me after the game. I wasn't trusting my instructor. My instructor cared about me in that moment. He loved me and wanted me to just breathe and not focus on winning. But I was so focused on my own ideas of how the inning should go. So this morning, Kent asked me to speak on submission. That's a softball topic, right? It's my favorite topic. Now, Kent asked me to speak on submission as we talk about cultivating culture at Downtown, cultivating Jesus culture at Downtown. And so today we're talking about the discipline of submission. And I would believe that submission, or surrender, whatever you want to call it, is probably one of the most central teachings that you just see everywhere throughout the life of Jesus, his teachings, and his gospel, and his example. So you can see it everywhere. And I will read from a few examples here in a minute. And even though it's so central to what we believe about Jesus, I would also contend it might be the teaching of Jesus we believe in the least. We live in a world that just by hearing the word submission, it conjures up so many issues in our minds. Issues of oppression, manipulation, power dynamics, greed, etc. It's a tarnished word for us, for a lot of our experiences, and for good reason too. Many of us in this room have suffered from betrayal, manipulation, being taken advantage of. And maybe the word submission just sounds like nails on chalkboard to our ears. But what does submission look like for Jesus? What does it look like for Jesus to surrender himself on behalf of the world? What is he inviting you and me into? And I contend that if we open our ears, if we open our eyes, we can find the power in what surrender and submission looks like for Jesus, for his followers, and how that changes the world. So in the New Testament, in Jesus' life, there's a lot of people who had their own ideas about what Messiah should look like. You had the Pharisees, and for them, surely the rabbi, the Messiah is going to come to us rabbis and tell us the truth of the law. He's going to solve all these interpretation issues we've got. He's going to be surely a pure and holy and blameless man more than any one of us here. He would never associate with the unclean. He would never step down low to talk to a Samaritan woman. He would never put himself at risk of becoming ritually impure. He would never lower himself to that place. You had other people like the Zealots who were like, surely when the Messiah comes, he's going to rally to our cause. Because the Messiah would never interact with tax collectors. He would never interact with Romans. He would never find favor in them. They're the enemy. They're our oppressors. Surely he would not do those things. And even Jesus' closest friends, the disciples and Peter, said, surely when the Messiah comes, he will kick out the Romans for us. Surely he will lead us in a revolution that will bring the kingdom of Israel back to its rightful place and authority. Surely he would never take the blame for an unjust ruling. Surely he would never submit to Herod or to Pilate or whoever else is in charge. Yet, who do we know the Messiah to be? It is true that Jesus came and the kind of holiness that he embodied was so much greater than what the Pharisees could have ever imagined. The truth he revealed about his teachings, the ways in which he prophesied and revealed prophecy and the truth of God, the way that he served others. Even for the Zealots, he attracted even Zealots into his own fold who were like, man, this guy changes things and this guy breaks barriers. And you also had his disciples who were like, there's something different about this dude. This guy has power. But even with all of that, they did not understand the kind of power Jesus was embodying and the kind of power he was calling us into. Jesus in Luke chapter 9 tells us, he tells the disciples, but more just even for us, he tells us, this is why I'm here and this is who I am. So I'm going to read in Luke chapter 9, and this is in verse 20. But what about you, he asked, who do you say I am? And Peter answered, the Christ of God. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell anyone. And he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. And then he said to them all, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever wants to lose his life for me will save it. For Jesus, submission is the whole reason he came to this earth. Surrender to the Father's will. He said things along with this. He said things, whoever humbles himself will be exalted. He said things like, love your enemies. He said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick. He said, not my will, but yours be done. Even to the point of death. We read about that both in Hebrews and Philippians, that he humbled himself to death even on a cross. But do we actually believe these statements? Or do we have our own ideas of what Jesus should be? I don't want us to lose the gravity of the things Jesus said in that statement in Luke 9. Dying to self. It's a nice phrase. It's catchy. Pick up your cross and follow me. But I feel like that the audience of Luke is receiving that on a whole different level than we are. For many of Jesus' disciples, hearing that, they will pick up actual crosses in their lives. God forbid that happens to anyone in this room. But if it did, where would we stand? Jesus is inviting us into a radical new way of seeing what freedom is and seeing what life is, because submission, service, lowering yourself, that's half of the equation. Because Jesus also says, when you do that, you actually find what life is. Okay? So we're not submitting and we're not yielding, surrendering just for the sake of. We're surrendering because we want to experience life and power and resurrection in the fullest form that Jesus experiences it. Because Jesus says, if you are willing to go down this journey with me, at the bottom, you're going to find true life. You're going to find freedom. You're going to find exaltation. As we read about in Philippians 2, that after death, God exalted him to the highest place. And that's the same for you and me. So what does this look like for the church? This is where it gets messy. Because we're all on board with Jesus' way of submission and surrendering. But we might be thinking, well, Jesus is on a different level. It's Jesus. Things are complicated here. And they are. But he invited you and me to pick up a cross too. He says, I believe in you. Yes. I believe in each and every one of you as my followers. Come and follow me, and let's do this together. He's inviting us into a different way of seeing the world. Now, there's so many scriptures in the New Testament about submission. And I'm going to talk about this for just a second, but it's not what I want to spend most of my time on. The passages on submission are also the ones that we're kind of like, I don't really want to go there. And here, I'm just going to say this, that when it comes to those passages about submission, where we go wrong is that where one party uses that passage to make the other party do what they want them to do, which is missing the whole point in the first place. When we hear submit to one another out of reverence for the Lord, when we hear in your relationships have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, that's not licensed to go to the other party or your neighbor and say, all right, so that means you need to submit to me. No, it's for you. And say, you are the one out of reverence and love for Christ that he gave himself for you. You yield and surrender to your neighbors out of love because love calls us to do that. But there are so many warped versions of submission where people use submission to try and abuse and coerce others. Now, what do we make of that? I would argue that the way to Jesus' surrender and submission, the way that we practice it, has two dimensions. The first is the inward submission. And this is the part that no one else sees. This is the part inside you where your motives, desires, dreams, hopes, the things that day-to-day people may not be seeing what's going on inside. Those things need to be brought in alignment and under the kingdom of God, where it's not my will but his be done. And if you go through that process of transformation, that inward submission, you dissect and wonder, okay, unpack what's really going on in my heart, that brings us into alignment with the kingdom. That's intimacy and relationship with the Father as we see with Jesus. Now, there's another component to surrender and submission, and that's the outward component. That's the outward dimension. Our relationships, putting other people's interests above our own, helping each other in their needs, serving one another. And And these flow from one another. That as I'm constantly aligning myself to the kingdom, I'm seeing how that transforms my relationships and how I surrender to other people. Here's the problem. If I am fixated inward on submitting to the Father, but I never practice outward submission and surrendering and humility amongst other people, then I'm missing half the equation. On the flip side, if I believe that submission just means I'm agreeable, I'm a doormat, I just let people walk over me, but I don't have that connection, then you're missing the point. And that's going to lead to so many warped views of what submission and surrender is. You need both. Because if you don't have both, you could either become a tyrant or you can become a doormat. And that's not what submission is. Because when Jesus lays down his life, he does so not by the authority of the Romans. He does it because of love and because of the authority that God has given to him. Because God appointed him for that and love demanded him. Because he had this. So I don't want us to hear submission and be like, okay, that just means we need to let people walk all over us, but we can't stand up for what's good and speak our minds or speak what our needs are. That's not surrendering in the way of Jesus. Jesus is not harmless. But when he lays down his life, he does so out of context of the relationship he has with the Father. And that's the same for you and me. Ultimately, the way this changes us as a community is that it makes us people who listen to each other more. We live in a world where people just don't listen to each other, where people don't hear each other. But that is not the case at Downtown. I want to read some words to that point from Dallas Willard, because I think Dallas Willard can preach it better than I can. So this is a script from him. This is, I think, a sermon he preached in the 80s called Fellowship in Submission. And I just want to read it for you as I kind of conclude my thoughts, because I think there's nothing fancy about it. Willard has a beautiful way of just calling us into the simplicity of what it means to follow Jesus. And this is what he says. The three words are these: accept the person, accept the person. Accept them for what they are. Secondly, listen to them. Listen to them. And thirdly, understand them. Accept, listen, and understand. All of these things are matters which, to put it very simply, people just die for someone to accept them, to listen to them, to understand them. And everyone else is so busy wanting others to accept them and listen to them and understand them that no one gets accepted, listened to, or understood. You have to be willing to step forward and break the circle. And you can do that in your faith because God accepts you. He listens to you and he understands you. I'm putting it very simply as I can because I think it's important, and I really want you to hang on to this. In your fellowship and in your submission, go at it with the attitude of acceptance of the person for what they are. Do not throw them away. Do not condemn them. Do not start thinking in terms of how wonderful it would be if they were someone else. It would be wonderful if they were probably someone else. Just don't allow yourself to go at it with that attitude. Accept them for what they are and listen to them. Really listen to them. Don't assume you already know. Listen. If that's the posture and mindset that we have as a community of Downtown, that's a culture that looks different, especially today. We need disciples who listen to each other, who look to each other's interests. We may have our own ideas about what church should be, and a lot of those ideas are really good. But more importantly, beyond that, at the center of this culture is the culture that listens to one another and accepts each other and serves one another. Jesus wants us to embody that as a community of faith. He wants us to humble ourselves before one another. It's always in the context of loving relationship that we have with the Father. If we remove that from the equation, submission is just power dynamics by the ways of the world, and it doesn't sustain itself. Ultimately, submission is a matter of freedom, which sounds really weird. Submission leads us to experience freedom and glory the way that Jesus does, that transcends the ways of the world. This is what we sing about in so many of our hymns. I've also called up an old hymn today, and I want to close my sermon just with these words of this hymn. This is from the hymn, "Make Me a Captive, Lord." And I want to read these words just to conclude, and then we'll stand and sing. And by the way, we will have shepherds up here, and if you need encouragement or prayers or anything, when we stand in a second, you're welcome to come and talk to them. But I want to close with this final word from this hymn as a prayer for us as a community. Make me a captive, Lord, and then I will be set free. Force me to render up my sword, and I shall conqueror be. I sink in life's alarms when by myself I stand. Imprison me in thine arms, and strong shall be my hand. Let's stand and sing.
Thanks so much for tuning in and joining us for this week's message. If you would like to learn more about the Downtown Church, you can check us out online at downtownchurch.org, and you can also follow us on social media. We'll see you next week as we continue our sermon series, A Culture of Discipline. Have a great day.